always a very busy time of the year if we're still here, and it's been a long time since the Congress wasn't here in the 1st of December. It's been years within the last couple of decades where we actually got our work done fairly close to the time that the spending year started. We're not close to doing that now, and in fact, the apparent best case scenario is that we'll need to extend this year's spending, the spending that ended on September the 30th, through most of the month of February before we really can get down to the work that you and I'd like to see happen as we serve on the Appropriations Committee. We're here a lot of times in December, but we're seldom here in December without having made a real start on the work that has to be done. Instead of the work that has to be done, we seem to be down to the work that our friends on the other side really want to do. And of course, that means the trillions of dollars of spending beyond what we would normally spend. That's being described by people as transformative, as once in a century, as FDR-like. The one thing it is for sure is it's 100% partisan. Nobody expects a single member of the Senate on the Republican side to vote for this reckless tax and spending bill. You can tell as you listen to the description of the bill that there's beginning to be more and more worry about what the American people are thinking that this bill might really wind up doing to their families and to the country when they hear that it's going to be transformative, when they hear that the entire economy will be different and people's problems will change in dramatic ways. People really begin to have to wonder how that happens, particularly when we hear that this won't cost anything. Well, of course it's going to cost something, and you can say all you want to, the cost is zero, but the cost can't possibly be zero of something that's going to transform the economy and solve people's problems. Somebody's going to have to pay for that. At one time, it appeared that, well, maybe we'll just raise every bit of those extra spending dollars on new tax dollars. That hasn't happened yet in any bill that's been brought forward. In fact, the bill that the Senate is going to receive from the House has an actual deficit, even by the Congressional Budget Office standards, of about $350 billion. In 2019, we almost decided that we couldn't move forward on the debt ceiling because the Speaker of the House said, we're not going to help on the debt ceiling unless there's another $19 billion of domestic spending. This is 2019. We spent weeks fighting about whether we'd spend another $19 billion. The Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary Mnuchin, was down here about once or twice every week in the negotiations that it would take to decide if we were going to spend $19 billion. Now we're talking about a $350 billion addition to the national debt, and that's even if you accept all the gimmicks in the bill. Now, there are other negative effects as well. One of those big negative effects will be, of course, the impact of inflation on families, and we're already seeing both the impact of the spending bill in March, the $1.9 trillion of spending that out of nowhere came into the economy, totally unpaid for, totally partisan. Now, last year we had 5 bipartisan bills that both sides worked hard to do what we needed to respond to COVID, to try to stabilize the economy. This year we started off the year in March with a almost $2 trillion totally partisan bill, and that partisan bill is beginning to have the kind of effects you would expect it would have. Costs are going up. There's more money out there, and mostly, Mr. President, there's just money that's just made up out of thin air. It's borrowed where the government's borrowing from itself. We're issuing bonds and buying the bonds at the Fed and then sending money to people, and they're spending that money, and of course, that has impact on cost. And then there are energy policies that have impact on cost as well. The immediate decision to not move forward with a significant energy pipeline that was being built, the immediate decision to do what we could to reduce domestic production of energy, and that's had exactly the results you would expect it would have, just like putting this money into the economy has had the results. So, you know, everything from home heating costs, which are estimated to go up as much as 50% this year if the weather is no worse than last year, to filling up your gas tank, where you have a chance of setting a new personal record every time you pull up to the gas tank and wonder how much money you can put in that empty gas tank today, to buying groceries, to even getting people together for the holidays. Now, independent analysis of the big tax and spending spree say that the number isn't $1.7 trillion, but it's about 3 times that, about $4.8 trillion. Now, how could you go from 1.7 to 4.8 just like that? You do it by assuming, as our friends who are sponsors of the bill do, that the spending in the bill will actually be spent over the entire 10 years. You know, there's one program where families with kids at home get a check every month from the government. That program costs about $450 billion a year, and it's in the bill for 1 year. Well, nobody on the other side believes it's going to be in the bill for 1 year, and nobody voting against the bill is at all certain that it's going to be there for 1 year. And most of the analysis say, no, that's going to be there for not 1 year, but all 10 years. So you add another 450 billion times 9, and suddenly you've added trillions more in spending to the bill. Our other programs last 2 years, and some programs last 4 years. Almost none of the programs that are to be paid for in 10 years, and even with a $350 billion deficit, almost none of the programs to be paid for in 10 years last 10 years. They are just in there to get the program started, to get people convinced that they really need the government to do something for them that the government hasn't done before, and then see if we can extend that. You know, as I mentioned back in March, we've already done this once with a totally partisan $1.9 trillion spending bill. And what happened after March? We got inflation to a 30-year high in the August numbers, and consumer confidence to a 10-year low. You've got to work pretty hard to get inflation at a 30-year high and consumer confidence at a 10-year low, but that's what happens when you put $1.9 trillion in the economy that wouldn't have been there otherwise. So what would happen if you put $4.8 trillion in the economy that wouldn't be there otherwise? The people that are most impacted by the results of that are the very people that the bill purportedly is going to help, is designed to help. We're going to solve all your problems. Well, first of all, the government's not going to get that done. We're going to solve Americans' everyday problems, but if you do that by raising their cost higher than their pay can go up, you haven't done anybody a favor. You know, President Biden campaigned on a return to normal, but he's governing on what his self-described allies say is radical change. Well, sure, those two things seem to me to be in pretty big conflict. You can't have return to normal and radical change at the same time. And, Mr. President, there was no mandate in the last election. The Senate is as evenly divided as it could possibly be, 50-50. In the House, Democrats have the closest margin that they've had in 170 years, and one of the closest margins that anybody has had in decades. You know, Americans want their elected representatives to stop selling every crisis as an opportunity to impose another one-sided view of how the country needs to move forward. You hear and I hear at home and even from the press, when is the Congress going to work together? Well, we worked together last year to do 5 bills to respond to the COVID and economic crisis, and we did that together. That was a pretty good model. And frankly, I think it was the model that the American people were thinking about when they sent this closely divided Congress and a fairly closely divided presidential race to the conclusion of the election. Families need real solutions to the challenges they face: reckless tax and spending, driving inflation, sending gas prices to all-time highs and home heating prices to all-time highs, and increasing costs at the grocery store, if there are things to buy at the grocery store, by 15 or 20%, surely isn't what we want to pass on to our children, our grandchildren, our people, hardworking families out there today trying to make things happen and make things better.